Hey everybody, welcome to episode 8 of The Grumpy Bunny, and hi, I'm making cheesecake. Actually, to be more clear, I've made cheesecake. Oh, I hear the sound of a dog. Double macaroni. Come here, want some cheese? Right here. Still can't see him, right? Everyone want to say hi? Okay, ready? Say hi, Elbow. Okay. There, now that the masses have seen the whole reason why the show exists, let's get back to the cheesecake. I've been making cheesecake for the past few weeks. This one right here is just a nice orange creamsicle. And I found out it's super easy and a heck of a lot of fun to make. Now, there are obviously you know what? Before we even get into the whole cheesecake situation, let's get all the niceties out of the way. I have to give the shout out to iLogic Media Network for being so awesome to host my show. I never do this in the right order, right? I need to thank my wonderful producer, John, who's always there to make sure that all of my pop-ups and all the great things that I have no chance of ever doing correctly, he does all of that. We need to thank each and every one of you for coming and watching this show. I cannot thank you enough for being a part of this. This is so much fun for me, and having you here and actually coming back means the world. But I'm going to get all verklempt, and it's just going to go from there. To that one person, you know who you are, who bought one of my Grumpy Bunny mugs, I have to say thank you very much. That's absolutely fantastic, and I hope that you like it. You know, I do have some things that are available to sell on my site, a mug, a water bottle. There is, God forbid, a fanny pack. You know, they may look a little expensive, but just understand that I don't get paid and nothing really happens here. So everything that you contribute for that actually goes to help producing my show, which again is not necessary. You can just watch it for free. That's fine with me. So, cheesecake, right. For the longest time, I've been making cheesecake in an oven, 325. I had to use the the boiler system where you take hot water into your roasting pan, place the pan with foil, put the pan in here, put it in the oven for, 50 to 55 minutes, then check on it, make sure it didn't crack, overbake or whatever, take it out, let it sit for another hour, so on and so forth. It was a lot of fun, absolutely, but it took forever. Then a friend of mine, actually two friends of mine, they're together, so I guess they make two friends who are one being. I don't know. Anyway, they got me an Instant Pot. And as someone who cooks from scratch, I'm going to say I was a little skeptical. And it turns out that it's actually pretty nifty. And one of the niftiest things that I think so far that I found to make is cheesecake. So I have taken a recipe here, and I've made it obviously gluten-free, both the cheesecake itself and the graham crackers that we're going to make. These graham cracker recipe too, just so you know, not only is it cool for making this crust that we're going to do for the cheesecake, but you can make ginger snaps and ginger cookies, ginger shortbreads, on and on and on. It's super easily adaptable. We'll get that later. Back to the Instant Pot. This thing's pretty nifty. So I found out that in 25 minutes, I can have a cheesecake made, another 20 minutes to rest, and then put in that fridge, and it's good to go. Super easy. I've had no issues. So as we're making both the graham cracker crust and the cheesecake, I'm going to explain first how you would make it a little slower in the oven. But I'm going to focus primarily on the how to make it in both your Instant Pot. You can do this also in the like a Foodie Ninja, or just double check with your manufacturer to make sure that you're able to do this and follow the specific directions for cooking in the device. But you can use this recipe across anything, whether you're using it in some sort of modern contraption or your oven. So before we talk about making both the graham cracker crust or the pie, let's talk about cooking in the oven. If you don't have a fancy machine or a non-fancy machine, that's fine. We're going to talk real quick on how you would do this entire recipe in the oven. So a lot of the stuff is simply the same. It's just the method of cooking that's going to be different. The biggest thing to remember is that you have your cheesecake pan needs to be smaller than the roasting pan that you are going to set your cheesecake in, okay? Needs to be able to have water that rests all the way around. 2, you're going to make sure that when you fill this with water, you're going to put the cheesecake in first, then fill. That way you're not overflowing with that. And make sure that the water gets to be halfway up the rim of your roasting pan. Doesn't matter if it's thicker or longer. I try to make sure that I have my cheesecake pan to be just a little bit higher than my roasting pan. But you definitely want to make sure that when you have your pan full, that there's at least a quarter to half of your cheesecake is underneath the water. And now you're thinking to yourself, Grumpy Bunny, how do I keep my cheesecake from getting wet in here? Well, that's the thing. You have to make a boat for it. So you're going to take aluminum foil. You're going to bring your aluminum foil, and you're going to wrap the base of your cheesecake like so to create a seal, making sure that the height of your foil is higher than the water on the side. The water that you're going to put in this dish needs to be hot from the get-go. You don't want to use the heat in the oven to warm this water. So I suggest boiling the water first, then adding it into the pot. That way it starts cooking for, you'll start cooking it a lot faster. It takes anyway. So make sure that your water is super hot on here as you pour it in here. You're going to put this in the oven uncovered at 325 for between 50 to 1 hour. So 50 minutes to 1 hour. And that's going to depend on the size of the cheesecake pan that you're using, as well as the thickness for it. If you see for a fact that it's starting to brown or get crusty or start to crack on the top, you can turn off your heat after about 55 minutes and crack the door of your oven and just let it sit there for about an hour and let it cool. That'll let you know that it's done. After it's had a chance to rest in your oven for about 1 hour, you can bring it out of the oven to rest just on a simple trivet or a hot thing for about 20 minutes on your countertop. Then you're going to transfer it after 20 minutes into the fridge, and you're going to leave it in the fridge for about 2 hours. That allows it to fully cool and allows the cheesecake to fully set. Okay? So real quick, go over again on the oven portion of this. 325 degrees for about 50 minutes to 1 hour, again, depending on the size of the roasting pan. You want to make sure that you're using foil to cover your cheesecake dip pan so that you're making sure that there's no water from your roasting dish. And you want to make sure that your roasting dish is full, at least halfway full of hot water, and making sure that when you rest your pan inside the roasting pan, that it gets to be a quarter or a halfway up the side of your cheesecake pan. Okay? Now, kind of a struggle, right? But still cool. Now, doing it in, no idea where to put this thing. Stay. Doing it in this Instant Pot has been an absolute and wonderful lifesaver. And we're going to get to the cooking portion here in a second, but let's talk graham crackers. We ready? Woohoo! So you're going to start with a large bowl, and you're going to take all of your dry ingredients. So we'll have our flour, which I'm using a 1-to-1 baking flour that's going to have a little bit of baking soda, xanthan gum, and it's a blended gluten-free flour. I'm also going to bring over a little bit of xanthan gum, and then I'm also going to need baking powder and baking soda. So first things first, it's going to be about 2 cups of my all-purpose flour. If your all-purpose flour has xanthan gum, you'll see in the ingredients that you can go ahead and omit that. That is perfectly fine. I'm still going to add a 1/4 teaspoon to it anyway. Just honestly, after cooking these things over and over again, it seems to have worked really well. This made a difference. But if in fact you do find a difference and your mixture has a xanthan gum, you can omit that. So I've got 2 cups of flour in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and I want to make sure I get this right for you all this time. So we're going to do a 1/4 teaspoon of the baking soda and a 1/4 teaspoon of the baking powder. Yes. So a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda and a 1/4 teaspoon of the baking powder. Getting all my dry ingredients in here first. Then I'm going to add a dash of salt. And a little less than a 1/4 of a teaspoon, so about 1/8 of a teaspoon of xanthan gum. Just because I really, in the instance of this, kind of want my graham crackers to have that solidity, especially because I'm using this as a crust later on. Going to give this a little bit of a whisk. Now here's the step where I've stopped for a moment. You can use shortening, like just a simple vegetable shortening, Crisco, so on and so forth, or you can use a room temperature butter. If you're using a room temperature butter, before we decide to add the sugar or anything else, after we put our flour, our baking soda, our baking powder, the xanthan gum if we need to, and the salt, we're going to cut the butter into our dough. Now, cutting the butter means to slowly blend it in, not necessarily mashing the butter up, but just, well, cutting it up. I'll take 2 knives, I'll bring it in here like so, and break it up. You can also, if you're like me and you're a little more adventurous, you can take your hands in here just like this. Just make sure that your dough, your butter is as close to room temperature as possible, and that you've taken the time to go ahead and dice the butter up just a little bit. I'm going to mix this in here first. And what's going to happen as you cut your butter in, you'll see that the flour mixture, the salts, and all of that starts to kind of coalesce, and it'll start to get this kind of sandy texture to it. If you're going to go ahead and use the vegetable shortening, you would skip this step. So I've got my butter in here, all just cut in nice. You'll see it's actually still pretty dry. Okay. Then I'm going to make a little bit of a well, and I'm going to add my wet ingredients. Oh, sorry, before I add the wet ingredients, then I'm going to add my sugars. I always forget that step. So I'm going to first add that the quarter cup of your granulated sugar right here. And I'm going to blend in here, just like so. Then I'm going to go ahead and add my brown sugar, a packed 1/3 cup, and I'm going to mix that up in here. I want my sugars to be pretty well blended in with my flours as well as with that butter before I move on to my wet ingredients, because honestly, everything comes together pretty well. At this point, what I'm going to do is preheat my oven to 325 degrees. And I have some pans back here that are going to be lined with parchment paper that I've greased with a little bit of vegetable oil. And I'll show you why here in just a second. So I've got my sugars, my brown sugar and my white refined sugar. I've got my baking soda, I've got my baking powder, and I also have a little bit of xanthan gum, and I've got my butter. I'm going to make a little hole right here in the center of my dish, and I'm going to add my cinnamon. Then I'm going to add my molasses and my honey. If you don't want to use molasses, you can double up on your honey. I think the molasses gives it this really great flavor, and it's super easy to find. So it's going to be, add our honey here, about 2 tablespoons, and then our molasses. Again, 2 tablespoons. This stuff is so, just the smell alone is crazy. Yeah. And then finally, I'm going to take and add my egg. Ta-da. So I'm going to give that a whisk. I'm actually going to use a pan for this. I'm going to mix this up here a little bit. Oh, the vanilla. Thanks, John. Then let's not forget the 1/2 teaspoon of the pure vanilla extract. So as we're blending in, I want you to know, after you get yourself the hang of these graham crackers, you can substitute your cinnamon for allspice if you're going to make something else. You can always do some cardamom, so especially if you're going to change those flavors in your cheesecake. It's just it's nice, it's fun, super easy, perfect recipe. So now I've got it mixed up in here a little bit. I'm going to blend. Kind of start to knead the dough a little bit to try to pull it together. And then once I've started to pull this dough together, I'm going to take just a touch of milk. I'm going to start off with about a tablespoon at a time. You just don't necessarily want to have a ton of liquid if you don't need it, especially you can go a little bit overboard in the milk quite easy. So just start here from the back. Or start when it's dry, just one at a time. So I'm going to pull this out here. And you'll see that it holds together pretty well. Just give it a little bit of a knead. And then I'm going to split the dough into two. Let's clean this up here for a bit. Kind of a messy thing, right? So now that I've split this dough into two, I'm going to grab those lined parchment cookie sheets here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the parchment right off the cookie sheet, and I'm going to set one of my doughs right on this pad. So I've got my parchment right here. I'll take my rolling pin. We're going to roll to about 1/6 to 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to make sure that I oil my rolling pin here, and I'm just going to roll these out. If you're going to use this for a graham cracker recipe, you can roll these to perfect squares. You can score them about an inch wide and about 2 inches long. But we are going to use this to make a graham cracker crust, so I don't really care how they look, right? So I'm just going to roll that out a little bit. And because I've oiled out this parchment sheet first, when these bake, they won't stick at all, and which is just fantastic. So I have my fork here. I'm going to make some fork marks just so I don't have this dough rise up around. Again, I don't really care because I'm using this to make my cheesecake crust. And then I'm going to top that with just a little bit of granulated sugar. Take my whole graham cracker, set it right back on my pan, and put it in the oven. You're going to set your oven temperature again at 325 for about 15 to 25 minutes. Just kind of depends on your oven. And you just want to double check them. It is a little bit harder to know whether your graham crackers are going to be a burnt or not. You want them a little light tan. So let's say almost like a color of camel, okay? And so after those have baked for about 20 to 25 minutes, I'm going to be able to pull those out, and they'll look like this. I know, right? Magic of podcast. So I've got this wonderful crisp flavor to them. They have a great snap, and they're perfect for making our graham cracker crust for our cheesecake. Now, like I said before, you don't have to just use this for this crust for the graham crackers for the cheesecake. You can make these, hold on. You can make these, and then, like I said, they work great for s'mores, they work great for snacks, other things like that. And you can change the flavors however you like. Not a big fan of cinnamon, you can use allspice. You want to bring a neat kind of almost savory flavor to them, maybe a little bit of rosemary that you can add in there, and a little bit of, the options are endless, and you can just use the base portion of the dough and the graham cracker dough as your template to do and experiment however you want. So back to the crust for this. So we've got our graham crackers, right? And we need to turn them into powders. So you have two options. If you have a food processor or a pretty cool blender, you can toss them in there. I just toss them into this bag, like a nice Ziploc bag. And I'm about to use the same rolling pin to break them down. Get my air out here. The nice thing is, too, is with these graham crackers that I made, I know exactly how much sugar is in them. I know exactly what ingredients are in there. And I don't have to worry. I'm also not paying a ton of money for these graham crackers just because they're gluten-free. The amount of money that I spent for the baking flour itself is absolutely more than enough to make oodles and oodles and oodles of graham crackers. So there we go. Take this down a little bit. When you're getting ready to do the dough for your, the crust for your cheesecake, you definitely want to make sure that your graham crackers crumbs are as crummy as possible, especially because it's a gluten-free dough. It has a tendency to kind of coalesce a little differently. So make sure that your mixture is all the way refined. You can even take your hands in here Think of it kind of like rough beach sand. Cool? Just like that. And that's our dough. So we've made the dough, we've got our crust, we're ready to go. Should we make some cheesecake? I think so. So I've taken a 7-inch round springform pan, and I've actually lined the base of my springform pan with parchment paper. Super easy to do. I just took the parchment paper, rested over the inside of the springform pan, then put the springform sides around the base of that springform pan and lined it. It actually saves me from having to cut up my cheesecake pans, which are a little more delicate than I like. It also made it a heck of a lot easier later on. So, to my crust here, I forgot to do something earlier, and that was melt our butter. So for the graham cracker crust for those cheesecakes, you're going to want to take some butter, about 5 tablespoons. Put it in the microwave for about 20 seconds. And what that's going to do is allow the butter, for the most part, to melt. At the same point, you can take that butter if it's been left out, just throw it in the microwave for about 5 seconds so that it's almost like a liquid, but it hasn't separated yet. And then let it rest for a little bit. If you don't have time to let it rest, exactly like in this moment here, microwaving your butter for about 20 seconds goes ahead and melts parts of it, but leaves the rest of it in a condition that it will cool itself quite rapidly. Do this, mix this up, and I'm just going to let that sit for a hot second, and the heat from the butter that's already melted in there will just kind of finish melting that. And I'm going to grease the snot out of this pan. So I'm going to screen the bottom and the sides. I don't want anything sticking to this. So now that I've greased my pan, I'll take that 5 tablespoons of butter for the crust. I'm going to mix that in here. And when you're mixing this up, as long as your the graham cracker crumbs have been crushed to a pretty good size and left to be pretty powdery, it'll start to form this kind of wet sand. It looks like that. And I'll take my crust and I'm going to press it right into my pan. Now, depending on the size of your pan, it's going to depend on how much graham cracker crust. Usually it's about 1.5 cups of the graham cracker crumbs that you're going to need, that 5 tablespoons of butter. You might need a little bit more. You can also use a little bit less. I mean, after all, if you're just doing what I'm going to do here, which is I'm just going to make a base for my cheesecake, and I'm not going to roll it up at the sides. So I'll leave it a little bit thicker. But you can always also smash this down a little thin and curl it up to the sides about, I would say, 1/4 to halfway up, again, the sides of that pan. And don't worry, when we make our filling, it's going to go right over that. So I've pressed this into my pan pretty hard. I've made sure that I don't have little holes or anything like that at the base of this. And I'm going to set that to the side. So now we are ready to talk about making our cheesecake filling. This is my favorite part. So the first thing that we're going to need is a bowl, which was somewhere. We'll use this one right here. And you're going to take your cream cheese. See, this is what happens when you have issues sometimes, right? Forget where you put everything. So I have 1 pound of cream cheese. That's going to be 2 blocks right in here. And then I'm going to take 1/2 cup of granulated sugar. I'm going to add that into the bowl. I'm going to take my mixer. Be ready, John? And before I get muted, because this is really loud and obnoxious, I'm going to talk about what's going to happen. I'm going to cream my cream cheese and my sugar until it's blended together. We're going to do these steps. I'm going to stop and explain the steps and why I'm stepping, and you'll understand why. So first things first, 1/2 cup of granulated sugar, and I've got 1 pound or 2 blocks of cream cheese. Then I'm going to blend. If you have a food processor, absolutely fantastic, like a KitchenAid or some other thing like that. Dump that in there, cover it, turn it on, let it mix about a minute to a minute and a half. If you're like me and you just have a hand mixer, it takes about a minute and a minute and a half, especially because I have this mixer that's crazy, crazy powerful. So I'm gonna go ahead here. Blended this. So now that I have blended this for a little bit, I'm going to take a spatula, my trusty spatula. I'm going to scrape down my sides. I'm making a mess, but thankfully my spouse has today off, which means I don't have to clean the set. So now I've scraped it down a little bit and I've blended. This isn't necessarily as blended as I want. You want to make sure that it's kind of, for you, when you're first blending it, that all this mixture is blended in together. But we're going to speed this process up a little bit, okay? Then I'm going to use 1/3 of a cup of sour cream. Oh, sorry, 1/4 of a cup of sour cream. I'm an idiot. There we go. And now I'm going to just pull this stuff up in here. And again, I'm going to blend. From this point forward, every time I blend up until I add the eggs, it's important for me to get as much of this mixture perfectly blended up as I can, because once I start blending in my eggs, there's no going back. So I've got my sugar, my sour cream, my cream cheese. I'm going to go back again and blend. Right now, my mom is freaking out because she saw my thumb on the inside of that thing, and I bet she's like, "Oh my God, honey, you're gonna cut your thumb off!" But did you know that's exactly what these things are for? So when you have your pan, you crush your own like that. So back to the actual thing. So at this point, I blended twice. I've got my sour cream. I'm gonna scrape down my sides. That's gonna be the first thing I do after the end of every single one of these steps. Okay. So next, I'm gonna add my lemon juice, which is about 1 tablespoon, and my zest. Now, if you are going to do the basic cheesecake, you would use lemon zest. If you were making a key lime cheesecake, you would have used lime juice and a little bit of lime zest. Same thing if you were doing the orange cream. You'll just use the same amount that it says in that recipe, but just substitute it for something else. So instead of that 2 teaspoons of lemon zest, I'm going to use 2 teaspoons of lime zest or orange zest. So right here, what I'm going to do, because I want to try chocolate orange, I'm going to take the zest right here. Remember, I can use a grater, the fine grater, just like that. Or if I don't have access to something like that, you can just take a fork and run it across the side very carefully. And that will also create your zest too. You don't have to have a fancy zester and a fancy everything else. Although it helps, you don't have to. So at this point, I've got my vanilla, I've got my lemon zest, and I've got my lemon juice in there. Scrape everything down at the bottom, and I'm going to blend. This is going to be one of the last times that I have an option to blend before I add stuff. So now I'm making sure I've scraped down my pan, and here we go. So now I've got that consistency. And now I'm going to start with my eggs. I'm going to add these eggs one at a time. When we start with your eggs from the point forward, you kind of want to watch how much you're blending. if you don't blend everything in enough, your cheesecake's not going to get the even or correct amount of rise. It'll be uneven and lumpy. If you put too much air into this, it's actually too much for the eggs, and then it's actually going to deflate, and you're going to have a thin, very kind of dense cheesecake. So again, I start with 1 egg, and I'm going to blend for about 1 minute. I've taken the time to scrape down the edges of my pan, and I blend. There we go. And then I'm going to repeat this process again with the second one. On my second egg, right here, I'm going to finish also with just about a tablespoon and a half of some 1-to-1 baking flour. Usually about on the last time that I'm running my eggs is when I'm going to blend, okay? Perfect, right? So now this is going to be the last blend that I have. I'm going to look at my mixture, see where everything is at. I'm going to scrape my bowl down here, because this is the last blend that I have. I'm going to add a little bit of salt. Again, your salt is optional. You don't have to. I kind of like it. It adds a little bit of a nice contrast to that. Just a touch here. And I'm going to blend for about 1 minute until I can make sure, to make sure everything is kind of blended in and pulled in together. Perfect. Now, if you're going to do the chocolate chip cheesecake, before you set your drop your mixture into the cheesecake pan, we're going to take a 1/4 cup or more or less, just depends on how much you like with it. And I'm going to add this right over the top. When I go to mix this, this is kind of important. I'm definitely not going to use that blender, and I'm certainly not going to whisk this super hard and rough because I don't want to beat any of the air that I've worked so hard to put into this cheesecake. So I'm going to take my spatula, and I'm just going to blend and turn. Blend and turn. This ensures that the least amount of work, well, the least amount of turns gets me all of those chocolate chips inside this cheesecake. Oh my goodness. I'll set this to the side here. I'm going to take my spatula, drop my cheesecake in this. Use my spatula here to kind of bring this down. Then I'm going to turn and jiggle. I'm not going to drop it. I don't know. You never want to take it to try to settle your cake or anything, you know, giving it a height. Again, all you're going to do is push that air right out of the cake. So I take a little, I set it on my table, a little jiggle and a little wiggle. A little jiggle and a little wiggle. Never drop it. Kind of like a baby, you know? So now that I have it all set in my pan, I'm going to take my Instant Pot. If you have a regular Instant Pot, it would have come with this, which is a little trivet. If not, you can just use the same wire cookie trivet or whatever, something that fits inside a steamer basket. That works too. You just want to make sure that your cheesecake pan doesn't ever actually, isn't resting on the base of that Instant Pot. Then I'm going to add about 1.5 cups of water to the base. Okay, so I got my trivet and my water, set it in here. I make sure that I got the little seal on this sucker. And then I drop my cheesecake in. You know what? Beforehand, I should explain that. Before you drop your cheesecake in, you can make a little sling. Take some foil, wrap it up into a little tape, almost like a little sheet, and then just drop that into your Instant Pot. Lock it. Plug it in. You're going to use the pressure cook setting. Turn the keep warm setting off for 25 minutes, and you let it go do its thing. So after it's done cooking in here for 25 minutes, it's going to go off. You're going to want to let that naturally release. So don't necessarily go vent this right away. Just let it sit. Once it's been properly steamed, you can pull it out and you'll rest it on a trivet right on your counter for another 20 minutes, kind of just like we did with our other cheesecake, right? And then you're going to drop it in the fridge. After it's been in the fridge for about 2 hours, you can pull it off. This one may not be done, so I've made an extra one. This is the key lime one. This is the cherry, the chocolate one that we made here. It's a little too cool, but you'll set it in the fridge for about an hour, and they're almost perfect. So I'll set that right there on my plate. Then I'm going to take these Michigan cherries that I cooked down earlier. Just drop that right on the top. Just like so. Finish with a little bit of whipped cream here. And oh, I'm sorry, Your Majesty. Here. And there we go. A chocolate chip cherry cheesecake. And again, so for those bases, I can use whatever I want. So like I start with that cheesecake base, and that same cheesecake base that we use with the vanilla, the lemon zest, I can adapt into making this chocolate chip cheesecake, this orange cream cheesecake, a regular lemon cheesecake, or a nice key lime cheesecake. So I really hope that you take this recipe. I want you to experiment with it and realize how easy it is, whether you're cooking in an Instapot or cooking in an oven, how easy it is to make some of the things that we all really enjoy, but sometimes can't always quite afford. I really hope that you liked all of this. If anybody wants to come over to my house and eat cheesecake, you are absolutely more than welcome. So we've made cheesecake. We've made our graham cracker crust. We've got just everything under the sun up here. I absolutely hope that you all had a wonderful time today. I had just a great time teaching you on how I make my cheesecakes. We are going to be taking a little bit of a break. So I just want to let you all know that we are not going to be back until mid-July. It's going to give me an opportunity to come up with a whole bunch of new ideas and things that I can show you, as well as just take a little bit of time and enjoy the summer as it begins. I really hope that you stay tuned and that you join me again, and I can't wait to see you until then. So thank you so much for coming and watching. I hope that you take my recipes, go try them the way that you see them, adapt them to make them however you like. However you do it, just stay in the kitchen and have some fun. That's really all I ask. I'll see you for questions and answers right after this. Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye. Pathetic. Wow. Anybody here for questions? Excellent, everyone. Well, thank you again so much for watching the show, and I cannot wait to see you again come season 2. We'll see you later.